do we define a value network? And I define it simply as any set of roles, interactions, and relationships that generate specific types of business, economic, or social value. We have never looked at networks as value-creating entities. We have looked at the businesses, we looked at companies, we look at nation states. Our unit of economic and business analysis has traditionally been the organization, or the collective of the organizations that are in an industry. We have never really looked at networks themselves as value-creating entities. From this perspective, any purposeful organization or activity can be understood as a value network. So a value network, in my way of thinking, isn't a thing, it's a perspective. How can we understand the value that's being created? It's a question. Well, the first major shift that you see when a network becomes value creating is people focus on the roles. Remember running down to the riverbank? Until we talked about the roles, we were just a collection of people. Right? Just a little loose network. We maybe knew each other, but we were a social network. Once we start to define the roles that are explicit in the network, then we begin to move to a purposeful value creation aspect. So from a value network perspective, we're interested in roles. In social network, the little nodes are almost always individual people. Joe, John, Mary, Tom. Here, we're not interested so much in Claudia, for example, but the consultant role that may be populated by Claudia today, but could be populated by someone else tomorrow. Not Nancy, service provider. Roles typically end in ER in English. I don't know if that's true in other, what it would be in other language. We may have a role of leader, but it could also just simply be a role such as resource provider. What does the leader really do? What do they really contribute here? The leader could be a facilitator. As you said, the leader could be a mentor. The leader could actually play different roles in different networks. And that's what we're more interested in rather than a generic role. The other aspect that tells us value is being created is we look at the interactions. And if we are trying to work together towards something, we create some formal agreements all the way through legal contracts, but they're things that we agree specifically to provide each other. We call these tangibles, typically goods, services, and revenue, things that tend to show up in your formal business processes, the things that you're obligated to do. If you don't do these, somebody's going to want their money back. Or somebody's going to be very unhappy with you, or you're out of a job. But along with that, there's a lot of informal exchanges of knowledge. Not just knowledge in a big sense, but very specific things. I'm going to provide you some research tips. I'm going to give you a report. You're going to provide me some revenue data. The more specific you can be, the more deliberately you can manage it. Just because it's intangible or informal does not mean it's not important. And if it's important, then you should be able to put some indicators around it and manage it. So we have not specific kinds of knowledge sharing, and we have other favors, benefits, motivators. I'll introduce you to my business contacts in Asia if your company will support us on this regulatory issue.
Why do you call that intangible? I'm just curious.
Because it's unstructured, typically. It may or may not happen. It is almost always unspoken or not addressed explicitly. These are loaded with assumptions. Every culture has assumptions about knowledge sharing. How do you get those on the table? So intangible means they are not structured as formally. Their performance indicators might be somewhat different around those. The way that you support them might be different. So you might create a system to support your business transactions with the informal interactions. You might say, we're going to support these by having a meeting every 2 months. So the support mechanisms tend to be quite different for the two. So what does that look like? If we were going to model this as a network, let's take an example of, this is my New Zealand example, in honor of all the Kiwis in the room. I work with Ag Research in New Zealand. These are the people that commercialize scientific discoveries. They're clone people. So they do things like designer milk, where they genetically engineer the cow to produce enzymes that treat medical conditions. Wild bunch. So anyway, that's the kind of research they do, and then they commercialize it. But it can take up to 12 years. But how many of you are in some kind of biological sciences? Yeah, this is a long process. So how could you move it along faster, for one thing? Can we drop that from 12 years to 8? Even that would be a big business win. So we can map out the formal interactions here, and just to read a few of these. So you have intellectual property rights, you have proposals, you have contracts, proof of concepts, fees, payouts, market research, revenue, all of basically the financial-based, tangible interactions, which is what people typically model when they model business relationships. What keeps the relationship alive and what helps reduce that time to market are the intangible interactions. Informal sharing of expertise, information about market pull, maybe some referrals or some new opportunities, validation, recognition, feedback. All of these things that we talk about, we give it really nice lip service, but do we ever deliberately track and monitor these in our specific business activities? So we have the one world where we talk about feedback and collaboration. We have another world where we talk about business processes. Here we're bringing the two worlds together in a human-centric, role-based way to talk about how the work gets done. Now, I don't want to denigrate process, because I am a huge believer in process. I cut my teeth on re-engineering. But I also learned the dirty little secret of process very fast, and that is when things get the least bit complicated, nobody follows the process. And my colleagues working in process management said, this is a problem. We have to figure out how to incentivize people to follow the process. And I'm going, but wait a minute. What if that's the way we work? What if that's natural for us to improvise and change things? And isn't that where innovation comes from? So if your goal is to drive out all variation, where does innovation go? Right along with. What we're trying to do here is find a way to model the work that fills the gap. It complements beautifully with social networks, with process, with the formal organization, but the relationship of each of those and how we manage each of those is somewhat different. In Boeing, they introduce value network analysis as Lean Plus and partner it with business process modeling. The social network analysis people see this as a next step. Once you've defined your social network, bring in the role perspective and then see how people work together. Formal organization is a resourcing model to make sure that the roles get filled and the infrastructure is provided. Asset management, I'm not even going to touch on that today, but the theory base of this goes way deep into intellectual capital and intellectual assets.